Welcome to episode 70 of the PCC podcast, How to Make Sugar Cravings Your Bee. So if you struggle with sugar cravings and cravings in general, you are going to love this one. So let's get right into it. Today, I'm going to be doing a short training on how to make sugar cravings your bitch, because I have had this come up a lot with clients this week of just struggling with sugar cravings and feeling like you have to give in to them and feeling like it's impossible to overcome and stick with your goals. And so I have maybe what would be viewed as a controversial opinion about dealing with sugar cravings and how I think you should go about them in a way that is not only going to keep them gone for good, but preventative so that you don't get them in the first place and you just don't have to play that willpower game. So if you are somebody who has a lot of cravings for sugar, sweets, or it could even be like salty stuff too, but like whenever you're just feeling like you have a lot of cravings, I'm going to help you break this down and really figure out how to stop them before they even get there, especially if you're somebody who feels like it just kind of ends up with you either like picking at stuff or grazing at stuff throughout the day, or you feel like you're always like really hungry in between meals and you'll have breakfast and then a couple hours later you're hungry, or you'll have lunch and then a couple hours later you're hungry. This is something that we absolutely can prevent and can make it a lot easier to stick with and achieve your fat loss and body composition goals. So, I'm going to start with what you don't want to do and some of the things that you more than likely are trying to do in the process of getting rid of these cravings. So number one is starving the craving, trying to just go cold turkey with whatever you're craving and trying to cut it out of your diet. And if you've been following me for any length of time on any platform, then you know that we don't preach about restriction because it's just going to make you want the thing more. So if I were to say, don't think about cute puppies right now, what are you going to really struggle to do? You're going to really struggle to keep that image out of your head. I swear, like a golden retriever or like some kind of cute puppy just popped in your head, right? And so that's because when you tell yourself that you can't have something, it almost always has the opposite effect because that's what you're placing your focus on. Instead, if you are, and really, if you're trying to starve that craving, that's what's going to happen with sweets. That's what's going to happen with salty food. That's going to be what happens with anything that you are trying to restrict or remove. And so we want to take a different approach to where our focus is diverted, but not from a distraction sense. So another way that we don't want to go about tackling our cravings is just distracting ourselves. So some tactics that even I used to use early in the day when I struggled a lot with my sweet tooth and I was struggling a lot with my weight and my fitness journey and my goals as a whole was I tried to chew a lot of gum, drink a lot of water. I would try to eat 0-calorie foods like sugar-free Jell-O, cucumbers, and just try to get rid of the craving by having my mouth do something. And it was usually somewhat effective, but usually I just had more of that craving later on because I wasn't really addressing the root of where the craving was coming from, and I was just keeping my mouth busy. And so if you are somebody who feels like you're trying to cut back on these sweets and you try to resort to those willpower type activities like chewing gum, drinking more water, trying to convince yourself that you're thirsty and you're not hungry, it's most likely not going to work. So don't try to starve the craving. Don't try to distract yourself. And then the last thing is, I don't recommend trying to just substitute sweet cravings for those diet-friendly sweet treats and 0-calorie, 0-sugar sweet treats. First of all of those sugar alcohols is probably going to lead to digestive issues if we're being totally honest. When you have things like sugar-free gummies, gum, candy, and things like that to try to stave off the craving. But at the same time, it's only going to give you a little part of the satisfaction that you're looking for when it comes to cravings. So it's going to be kind of short-lived, and you're probably still going to have the craving for the real thing later. And we all know what happens when we restrict and we restrict and we restrict and we restrict. And then all of a sudden we have a moment of weakness, or we're just too tired to care. And we say, screw it, I'm going to have the thing anyways. And because we restricted for so long, and because we have this black and white attitude with food, we say, once I get a little bite, you give me an inch, I take a mile. You run with it, you overeat like crazy, you feel super guilty, and then you're in a worse spot than when you started. And that is exactly what we want to avoid when it comes to things like starving, cravings, things like that. So let's talk about how to get rid of these cravings, how to even prevent them in the first place. And if you are still having them, some strategies that you can use as well. So my background, if you didn't know, or if you're new here, because I have seen a lot of new faces here. Hi. I have a bachelor's in neuroscience. So my whole background is centered around psychology. I just remember in high school, I took my first AP class as AP Psych, and it was like my favorite thing in the entire world. And I was like, I'm going to do something with this, but I'm not quite sure that I want to be a therapist. So then it morphed because I had such a passion for my own health and fitness journey. And here we are. And I've integrated the mental and psychological side of behavior change with fitness and your health goals. And when it comes to cravings, we have to think of, where do they come from? And so this is where those two worlds merge a bit. Most cravings are multifactorial. So they're not just from one place. Typically, they are going to come from two areas: physiological and psychological. So what is a physiological craving? You can better categorize this as hunger. You can better categorize this as your body is literally needing something. And so a physiological craving can come from a couple of places. Number one, it can come from the fact that you're not eating enough throughout the day. And it's actually really funny because I have so many women that I talk to on a day-to-day basis that feel like they need to cut out sugar, they have too many cravings. When we actually sign women up and start looking at their food logs, they're almost always under eating drastically, like 1,000 calories a day drastically. And they're not even trying to. They just think that that's normal. And they wonder why they're having all these rampant cravings. So a lot of times cravings come from the fact that we're undernourished, because diet culture has basically burned into our brains that if we're eating more than 1,200 calories, we're going to gain weight, which is absolutely ludicrous. Or we have some really long-standing nutrient deficiencies. So I've done more and more research on this with my own journey. Depending on your situation, what you've gone through, or just the nutrition that you've had over the years, you can have nutrient deficiencies in critical nutrients that can dysregulate your hormones, your gut, and just make you more prone to even more cravings. As well as just the type of food that you're eating. So let's say you're eating enough total calories, but you're still having these cravings. You're still hungry between meals. You're still feeling snacky. It can also come from just not having the right kinds of food that are satiating, that are holding you over from meal to meal. So if you're having physiological cravings, we can tackle them from a couple of different lenses. So lens number one would be the overall undereating side. So number one, I would highly recommend that anybody who's watching this, if you feel like you struggle with cravings, log everything that you put into your mouth for 7 days on a tracking app and see how many calories it is. And if you are a female, especially if you're a male too, if you are anybody who is eating less than 1,200 and dare I say even less than 1,500 calories per day, you're drastically under eating. And the reason you have cravings is because your body isn't getting enough, period. And so the number one thing you probably need to do is reverse diet, get your calories up, and get your metabolism running in a better spot as a whole. Now, if you are already eating plenty, but you're still having these cravings, it could be because even though you're eating enough calories, you might not be getting enough of the right nutrients. So when it comes to having nutrient deficiencies, things that I see that are really common are deficiencies in iron, magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, and a lot of other things. And really what I would recommend most people do, and I've always been adamant about this. I've been coaching for almost 9 years now, and I've always been adamant about the fact I think most people should take a good quality multivitamin and a good quality omega-3 fatty acid fish oil, and probably vitamin D, but double check that with your blood work first. And if you're doing those three things, you're going to lower the likelihood that you have tons and tons of micronutrient deficiencies by a lot, but not a Costco or Walmart one a day multivitamin. You need something that's higher quality, that's CGMP certified, that's third party tested, and has actual clinical effective doses of all of the appropriate micronutrients that you need. Brands that I trust that I've worked for in the past and that I partner with are brands like Core Nutritionals, Thorne, Nutridyne, Designs for Health. These are brands that I recommend to my clients as well. So look into those because it's important that you have a high quality multivitamin. And even if you eat all the fruits and vegetables in the world, you would have to eat a lot of food and probably more food than you are able to stomach in a day to get all of the daily values of all the vitamins you need on a day-to-day basis. So a multivitamin is a great insurance policy to make sure you're not having deficiencies and cravings from something that you could easily control with just like one tablet a day. So that's one. One was under eating calories. 2 was micronutrient deficiencies. And then 3, this is kind of one that I see the most common because we are working with clients on already bringing their caloric intake up, but maybe they just haven't had good practice with really portioning and spacing their meals out throughout the day. So they're still ending up hungry and having cravings between meals or at the end of the day. And so what I would encourage everyone to do, if you, let's say, hypothetically, you have a 2,000 calorie diet to fulfill on a day-to-day basis. What I see a lot of women do is have a very scarce mindset with food. So what they're doing is they'll eat their egg white omelet or their smoothie in the morning. That's 250 calories. And it's basically just protein and fruit. And then they will have their big salad for lunch, which is like another 250 calories. And then they basically just kind of ride out the rest of the day until dinner time or late at night. And then they have, 1,000+ calories to eat. They're exhausted, they're starving, and they have a ton of cravings. And then they shove in the rest of their calories at the end of the day. And then they wonder why they feel bloated, why they have no energy, why they continue to have cravings. And that might be a little bit of an exaggeration in terms of the numbers that I just threw out there, but that pattern is so common. And so what I really encourage you to do, if you are tracking calories, you are trying to live a healthier lifestyle and prevent cravings, is have a bigger breakfast and lunch. It sounds really, really simple, but there's actually been a good amount of research to show the difference between a small breakfast, medium lunch, large dinner, and the opposite, big breakfast, medium lunch, small dinner. And the difference in adherence, in cravings, in overall satisfaction with food from the big breakfast side of things is remarkable. And so what I would encourage you to do is, let's say you're that same 2,000 calorie a day person, then I want your breakfast to have like 500-600 calories. And that sounds terrifying to most people, especially those who have a poor relationship with food, who have been tracking their food for a while because they want to have room for snacks at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, they're not going to want those snacks if they actually nourish themselves early in the day. So large breakfast, and make it chock full of protein, of fiber, of whole grains or complex carbohydrates, and healthy fat sources, and have it truly be a balanced meal versus just a bowl of cereal that's 400 or 500 calories, right? Because if you have all of those different macronutrients together, then you are going to be that much more satisfied going into the rest of your day. It's going to hold you over to your next meal. And same idea with lunch. Don't skimp on that either. Let's go 400, 500 something calories in that meal if you're that hypothetical 2,000 calorie person, and you're going to be that much more satisfied going into dinner. And then lastly, too, if you have a big gap between lunch and dinner, just plan in a high protein or high fiber snack midway through there to hold you over. There's nothing wrong with planning in a snack. So that is the preventative way to get rid of our physiological cravings. And that is just half of the picture. So this is longer than I thought it was going to be because I tend to do that. But let's talk about the fun part of this, and that is the psychological side of cravings. So in the psychological side of cravings, we typically get these when we are feeling either stressed, emotional, those sorts of things come up. And like I said, it's usually a mixture of both, right? So we can be under eating, malnourished, and then when emotional triggers hit, especially if we have deficiencies in things like B vitamins, iron, zinc, and magnesium from chronic stress, which is something I've shared more about on my Instagram, then we are going to be that much more prone to a heightened stress response, which means that we're going to be less resilient to logically looking at the situation and more prone to having more of these cravings that are emotionally driven. And so emotionally driven cravings, typically what people try to do in this situation is they try to, again, starve the craving, clear their pantry, get rid of the foods that are trigger foods or things that they can't control themselves on. And while these strategies might work in the short term, I really encourage you to go to the root of the craving in the first place, which has to do with the emotion that you're feeling. So food plays a lot of roles in our lives, right? And that's not a bad thing. Food is more than just fuel for our body. It is social, it's emotional, and it can fill a lot of different shoes in our life. But the problem becomes when it fills too many of those roles and it actually takes the place of other things in our life that we should be tending to. So when we have cravings, there's a 4-step process you can use from an emotional standpoint to stop them in their tracks and help yourself actually get what you need. So the first step in this process is to identify the emotion that you're experiencing. You have to learn how to pause. And this is one step that takes a lot of practice. So give yourself some grace on this, but what is the emotion that you're feeling? And label it. If you don't know this, you can look up an emotion wheel on Google, and it's this big colorful wheel with like hundreds of emotions on it. So if you struggle to label your emotions, save that to your phone and ask yourself, whenever you're feeling these cravings start to come up, pause and ask yourself what you're feeling. Once you've labeled the emotion, then you have to investigate it. Ask yourself, instead of just judging yourself for having the emotion, investigate, what does that mean that I actually need, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples here. If you are feeling really lonely, food can oftentimes fill that seat of companionship, because we feel like food is our friend. Food is something that can give us comfort. And so if we're feeling lonely, you have to ask yourself, what do you actually need though? If you're feeling lonely, you need true companionship. And so something that can fill that hole even better than food can is maybe calling up a friend or having quality time with a loved one and getting that actual companionship. Food can also fill the void of joy, of happiness, because especially sweets and hyperpalatable foods can really fire off those reward centers in our brain. So if we're needing that little spark of joy, that little spark of happiness, what if we practice turning on our favorite comedy show instead of giving into that craving? In addition, we can also turn to food for comfort when we're feeling sad or negative emotions. And so if you think about really nurturing comfort, then maybe you can try snuggling up with your favorite blanket, warm candle, book, tea, and nurturing that craving, that emotion that way. And so again, these things work together. So you cannot just address the psychological and expect the cravings to go away if you are malnourished. And if you are addressing the physiological side and you get all of your nutrition ducks in a row, but you're still struggling with emotional regulation, then you can't expect those cravings to go away either. So we have to work on both, which is why I gave you both sides of the equation here. So hopefully that gave you some insight on where to start with your sugar cravings and how to make them your bitch. Thank you again so much for listening to the PCC podcast. Hopefully you got some value from this episode. If you did, make sure to subscribe and maybe share this episode with somebody who this could benefit, who struggles with cravings as well. The only way this podcast grows is through word of mouth. So make sure to spread the word and share it with someone who could benefit. Thank you so much, and I'll see you back here in the next one.